everyone, my name is Caitlin Kavanagh and I'm a product marketer here at Revenera. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Migrating from Heritage Installer Technologies. I'm joined by Crispin, the co-founder of TLUX, and Pushpa, Senior Product Manager at Revenera. Today, they'll discuss common misconceptions, accepted best practices for reviewing and updating your installation and deployment strategies, as well as the risks of maintaining outdated systems, such as security vulnerabilities and compatibility issues with newer platforms like Windows 11 and 12. Before we get started though, let's go over a few housekeeping details. Firstly, today's discussion will be roughly 20 minutes long. If you have any questions or comments along the way, please add them in the Q&A tab and we will try to answer those at the end of the session as time allows. We are doing a bit of a shorter session today, so if we don't get to your questions, don't worry, we will follow up with you after the session. We also have a number of resources available to download on today's topic, so please check those out in the handout tab. That's all from me for now, so over to you, Crispin and Pushpa.
Hi, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome. I think it's a great idea. Let's just have a couple of quick introductions from Pushpa and myself. So, Pushpa, after you.
Hey, hi all. My name is Pushpa Dindur. I'm Senior Product Manager here in Revenera. I'm based out of Bangalore, India. I have around 20 years of experience in software industry in different domains like telecommunications, app development, OTT, and healthcare. Donning different hats, starting from Java developer, being engineering manager, architect, and program manager. I'm currently leading products like Install Shield, Install Anywhere, and FlexNet operations as senior product manager. And my expertise is basically into product strategy, product roadmap, and customer success through pragmatic planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Pushpa. So a little bit about myself. So my name is Crispin Luxon. I run a company called TLUX. TLUX Technologies based out of the UK. We actually are Flexera and Revenera's consulting and training partner of choice. So really that involves us in all kinds of training, consulting exercises on behalf of Revenera. My pedigree is that I actually used to work for Install Shield. So going back nearly 25 years to the early 2000s, I worked for Install Shield as a consultant, and for 15 years through when I actually moved on to create TLUX. And really, why we're talking today is because we have two companies, a very close partnership, a very symbiotic relationship. We are, as TLUX, in the engine room of many clients, and we're seeing a shift in focus of clients needing to put more focus onto how to migrate what we'd call heritage, some may say legacy, installation technologies. And we're going to be going through today a little bit how we help you with that. So my experience really has been helping companies of all sizes on all platforms, all the way back from migrating to Windows XP in terms of installers, all the way through to the latest and greatest that we see today. We operate globally. The US is our largest market. We operate also through our APAC, and we're going to be growing in 2025. You'll see more of that, more of our presence in the DAC and the USA region. So let's move on and talk about some more exciting topics for today. I think to carry on from my point just now, we see as a independent third-party technology vendor and kind of supplier of best practice, a lot more clients struggling with installers. And you may say, well, why is that a big problem? Why does it matter that my installer doesn't work? Because I'll just try it again and again and again. But actually, a lot of these problems are exposing larger problems further down the line. So if you can't update your software, if you can't install the latest and greatest, your end users, your enterprises won't be running the latest and greatest technologies. And that may well mean that it's not quite as nice an experience, but actually more importantly, as we'll see later, that will open that company up to vulnerabilities and problems. So, this will also have repercussions throughout the business. So a lot of clients will see a raise in support costs. A lot of those support costs will probably to do with very easy to fix things like getting on the latest versions of drivers or the software technologies inside those products. But if people can't update their software, and if you as a vendor don't really put this in your radar, then you're going to start getting customer problems. You're going to get customer satisfaction issues. You're going to have customer retention issues because people will just walk away and use another product perhaps. But as I say, more importantly, it's going to leave your software open to vulnerabilities. And they may not manifest themselves in anything particularly visible at the outset, but this, as we know, can often sow the seed for problems later on. And a little statistic down here that actually known vulnerabilities, and that's important because there are known vulnerabilities and unknown vulnerabilities, account for about 60% of data breaches. And that's all fixable, that's all avoidable, and at the very least we can minimize and dilute the impact of that. So we talk about how we do this. We do this in a planned way. We mustn't do it in a fire and forget way. A lot of us remember not that long ago there were problems with CrowdStrike, and not picking on them particularly, but they were the most recent highly visible example of this, where companies deployed software without really thinking about the repercussions of that. And if you peel that back to the next layer down, it was clear that there weren't any plans, there weren't any testing and strategy around how that piece of software can get applied into the environment, what happens on a success, what happens on a failure. Back in the day when I used to do programming, which is a while ago, you'd often have code written through a nice successful flow, but you'd also have things called exceptions, and you'd have to handle those exceptions. And that's really what we're talking about. And having to think ahead, dare we say, use the D word, the design word, in this environment to help make sure that we fully understand the repercussions of a successful deployment and an unsuccessful deployment. And a few years ago, I think we're talking 7 or 8 years ago, and here in the UK, so I'm based out of London in the UK, our National Health Service was brought down for the best part of a week or 2 weeks because essentially a virus got onto the machines. And the virus got onto the machines, as these things always do, because of a poorly managed desktop estate. That's the bottom line. And it was a classic case, as it is in quite a lot of big businesses, where there's no real clear responsibility of who should pick up these things. So let's talk a little bit about how we would do that in this considered way. Before we do that, let's talk a bit about what are the common things I see when I talk to clients. And I talk to clients big and small software vendors, specialist software vendors with just a few hundred customers of their own, large multinational enterprises. And their perception is that I don't really need to do anything, it'll solve itself. If I put my head in the sand, if I look the other way, it's just going to solve itself. Will it work? Like a lot of things in life, we need to attack this head on. It may well not be something you need to fix today. It may well be something you can't fix today. But certainly giving a considered view as to actually where the responsibility lies. And if you're the vendor of a software package, it's your responsibility to make sure that can be used by your clients in the most successful way possible. People always, and this is due to a lack of understanding really, people on the second point here, people think there's nothing I can do about it without causing a big disruption. A lot of the time, that's just a lack of knowledge and understanding, which is completely understandable. That's really why organizations like us at TLux, that's why we exist, because we do this every day of our working life. We specialize in helping clients de-risk this kind of operation, help de-risk, migrate to the latest technologies. So your end users, and therefore the subsequent desktops that we're managing, because we're ultimately talking about end user desktops, making sure they're as reliable as possible. And on the Revenera side, Revenera are the makers of InstallShield. Well, InstallShield is the de facto standard in making installations. It always has been. It always will be. There's a massive market out there. So who best to help guide us through, the best ways to make the best technology work in the best way for you? Again, classic example, it's out of my control. I don't have the skills, right? And there are many ways you can attack this, but I think before you do that, you have to understand what the problem is that you're looking at. You can't solve a problem until you understand it. And certainly, again, from the Revenera perspective, Revenera have a great global support team working all around the clock to help clients every day of the week. Revenera has a very innovative product platform that Pushpa is responsible for. And then side by side with TLux, there's a whole bunch of options around training and consulting that you can look on our website to learn more about. I really think into the next topic. I don't know where to start. Right. And again, it's an end user problem. It's not my problem. Well, it might be an end user problem, but actually you own that problem because until the day there's nobody else who can fix it apart from yourselves. You're the software vendors, you're in the driving seat, and we're here to help. So how do we help? What is the best practice around doing this kind of thing? Well, we've all heard of the old phrase plan to fail, fail to plan to fail. And a couple of minutes ago, I mentioned the D word, the dirty word, the design word. And I work with companies all the time, and we take a step back and we talk about what are the problems with their installers, their old installers. And we actually just sit down and talk about what they've got today and where they need to go to. It's a bit like any kind of business transition, right? So we talk about what is the shape of the installer. Is it like an old house with a garage, with a conservatory added, with another extension? And that's fine for a while, but actually at some point you need to decide, are we going to redirect our efforts and perhaps pull a few things down and make some changes for the future? So you need to involve all your company's, different departments, product teams, marketing teams, support, end users even, and forums into your release strategy. It's our job, it's your job as the installation authors, as the vendors, to make this process easy. A simple installer is key to user adoption. Quite often people will blame their end users and say, oh, the end user made the wrong choice. What are they doing? Well, actually, it was our fault for making that choice not clear to them. And so also strengthening your support mechanism around any software upgrade and rollout. And the various ways you'll do that will differ on your company. Replacing the old with the new, right? There are decades now of installations that used install script, which used to be the only choice, by the way, in the 90s and the early, before Windows Installer, before MSIX. Install script is massively widely used alongside JavaScript, alongside VB script. But we're seeing these technologies transition out now. Certainly with things like Windows 11, where VB script, for example, is not turned on in Windows 11 as default. Okay, so for enterprises, that may well be a problem in terms of their strategy. You need to review what needs to be migrated. There are many options out there. You don't necessarily need to do everything at once. You don't necessarily need to do everything at all. And having a bit of an idea about that would be very useful. And the things that are coming in, digital signing, cloud build, XML support, native MSI support is widening every month, right? It's growing and growing. Pushpa, any comments from your side as the product manager in Revenera about these kind of new options in terms of the technologies coming in? Any insight from your side?
Yeah. So, like you mentioned about, let me pick upon MSIX, right? Uh, Microsoft brought this in 2018, and we know that my MSIX, they are trying to give the Windows app packaging format, which will give the best of MSI, best of Apex, AppV. If you're still building on the older ones, you have to choose one of those. I think MSIX is giving better features among picked from all these types. And if you want to make use of differential feature rollout feature, or containerized packaging of the features, it's high time we move to MSIX. And install shield is already readily supporting you to build your products, package it using MSIX. So that's one thing. And uh, people know about MSX already. Apart from that, we also have very important way of signing your digitally signing your product. Right? You
Yeah.
mentioned about digital signing here. We have support for various ways of digital signatures. now is a time for people to move away from old form of certificate signing and come to new and secure digital signing mechanism. We know about we support HSM, we support cloud HSM, be it Azure Key Vault or even the AWS, wherever the cloud signing happens, we do support digital signing through Install Shield. And if your product is an air gapped environment, we can also support USB based token based signing
Oh,
for the product. So these are the few things I can say which Install Shield is already readily supporting, and moving from the heritage installer way of doing things, you can already make the best use of these features.
yeah, and I'd agree. And actually, my experience of using Install Shield, for 25 years is you guys are typically a couple of years ahead of what the market needs, right? You're very innovative in what you're supporting, and that makes sense because the audience today will be people making installers and software vendors. There'll be people responsibility for releasing software into enterprises, and those software vendors right now they've got the job of making everything ready for Win 11 and beyond, for digital
Yeah.
signing, for cloud builds, for all that stuff, and that one will then trickle right to the enterprises in the future, and they'll be enterprise and business ready. And the cloud building is fantastic. I speak to clients, all the time about how much flexibility that gives them. That gives them autonomy in making builds. It lets them move the builds around their cloud-based infrastructure, which nowadays everyone's either in Azure or AWS and that kind of mix. So yeah, amazing. So moving on from that theme, here's the classic question of, okay, that's brilliant. Thanks Pushpa, thanks Crispin. You're telling me a little vision for the future, and you're telling me off a little bit of things I should perhaps be considering, and that's great. And we do that from the perspective that we've helped clients through this journey before. But people will often say to me, well, okay, what happens if I don't do this, right? What happens if I just sit back and just don't do anything at all? The world's not going to end, right? We had the millennium, bug in 1999, and the whole world thought everything's going to stop in 2000. It didn't, right? But okay, it didn't because people put effort into mitigating that. So there's some consequences that we can see listed here, and how much this impacts you as a business will vary based on your exposure and your technology stack. But essentially, like we were saying with all the innovations from Install Shield and Pushbuzz team, you're not making the most advantage of the new technologies, right? So just the second point here, if you're wanting to go to Windows 11 and you're wanting to do new digital signing, you can't use our products and technologies because a product from 3 years ago, 4 years ago with Install Shield, what would that have been pushed for? Let's say 2019 of Install Shield, right? That wouldn't have included Windows 11 support. It wouldn't be there. There's no magic involved, but in 2019 that wasn't a focus. So you're not going to take advantage of the latest technologies. You're going to have a missed opportunity, and all software needs this from time to time to refresh from the ground up with a heritage installer. So, as I said, the analogy would be an old house where you built a nice little house, then you added a garage, then an extension, then a porch, then a loft extension, and then there comes a point where you can't really do anymore, and then you want to put, the latest technology into it, Wi-Fi 7, right? Again, satellite TV in all the rooms, but you can't. And so actually it becomes a missed opportunity if you don't do something about it to take a step back and plan from the ground up. And actually, there are lots of clients we help, and that is the biggest driver for this is actually being able to efficiently patch and update your products moving forward. So I talk to customers, have done for decades. No one's going to give you a prize for the world's most beautifully crafted installer, right? Because they'll just go next, next, next. Does it work? Brilliant. And that's fine. That's the goal. But now that software is more transient and that deployment technologies with MECM, etc., and cloud-based software installs are more flexible, software used to be installed as a stack of pancakes, right? Like a stack of pancakes all up and up. And it was all fine because you make it all level and they're all with the same pancakes. But nowadays, you need to take a pancake out halfway through or take a couple from the bottom and a couple from the top. And that's the deployment world that we live in today. And so actually, the need to efficiently patch and update installers is directly linked to how well your installer is created. It's also directly linked to how well you use the latest technologies. So you'll see on our website, and you'll see links via the Flexero website, all kinds of ways that we can help, and Flexero will help with an Install Shield with very efficient patch creation, right? Pushpa, there's some great abilities in Install Shield to create native MSI patches and upgrades from different versions and making that super easy. Now, this is something that used to be a black art 10, 15 years ago, and Install Shield, as always, is really helping bring that to the masses. So, as well as bringing things into certain line, into consistency, bringing in the benefits of the latest technologies, future proofing is also very important. So again, we need to leverage the best of breed technologies within Install Shield. To my point earlier, if we look at Install Shield nowadays, I can give it a bunch of MSI files and out pops an MSP, which is a patch, a Microsoft patch. I can give it 5 or 6 of these in different orders. I don't even need to worry about how I'm going to actually deploy the patch. The patch will be created for me. You can bring in experts like ourselves at TLux. I said we do this every day of the week. Somewhere around the world, pretty much every day, we're helping clients de-risk their migration from an old installer, perhaps through M&A activity, perhaps through needing just to bring everything up to speed, perhaps through a problem with deployment. You know, we probably all have this where a very important client had a problem migrating or using your product, and it was kind of manageable up until that point, and then suddenly a big client had a problem, so you've got to do something about it. What you don't want to be, though, is forced into making that decision, because doing that under duress, under stress, isn't going to be as well formed as when you're doing it in a slightly calmer environment with good foresight. So baking in the best practice to accelerate this migration from wherever, be it a non-install shield installer, right? It might, you know, if we talk about an installer, it might be a batch file, it might be a bunch of instructions, but it's more likely to be an old installer from the past. And again, something else we see quite often is people having to merge products into one install base because of M&A activity or just product merging. You probably get this push for, right? There's all kinds of things that Revenera has technology-wise. You need to put that into the product as a single entity, right?
Yes. So,
Sure.
so you're talking about, we always upkeep ourselves with the new technologies, and like you mentioned, we are much ahead of the industry trend here to bring in the latest from Microsoft, different packaging ways, and uh, be ready as soon as, for example, Windows Server 2025 is gonna come. They're just pre-releases there, but we are already testing and getting ourselves ready to support our customers to build and pack be ready for Windows Server 2025.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of my points earlier was exactly the same, where, you know, Revenera with the install shield product, they're always a set amount of time ahead to make sure that you and us as a technology provider have got the latest and greatest. And these things are always changing. You know, this is the classic thing. My third point here, you know, 10 years ago, working with clients on installers was all about .NET this, .NET that, right? And .NET grew, and well, it grew and grew and grew. It was, you know, massive, and then there were loads of language packs. I think there's about 50 different merge modules pushed, isn't it? I think now with .NET, it's like, oh, it just is a blur. But actually, things are changing where companies or Microsoft, frankly, are realizing there needs to be a more succinct way to deploy this and giving people that choice.
Yep.
And then that brings us down to automating. You know, everyone loves to automate, or being asked to do more with less. Automation is a great way to do these things, building in the cloud, building overnight, giving your software development team a folder to drop their binaries into, and a script will pick it up automatically. That's fantastic, as long as you manage it. And it's fantastic as long as it's got some constraints and some rules around what it does. If it's not, then you've got the Wild West, right? And that's not good in any way. So really, my last point here, I think, syncing up with Pushpa's perspective, because this is what they do at Revenera, building in a periodic technology and release review to make sure you're ahead of the game, or just ahead of the game wherever you need to be, is very, very important. So if we don't do that, let's just talk very, very kind of lastly, bringing this to a close, a couple of examples. So 2 examples that I will just share with you today. And there are many more, but a long time ago, a few years ago at least, I worked for a big telco company here in EMEA. And they came to, this is when I worked at Flexera actually, and they came to us with the problem statement, which was nearly half of their support calls were to do with malformed installations and malformed software versions. And it was costing millions a year. And this is for a product that was only going to grow. So that cost was only going to go up. And what they didn't do, they didn't put their head in the sand and not make it their problem and think it's an end user problem and not look at it that way. They actually embarked on a project with us to actually build best practice, as we said earlier, from the ground up, to unpeel, if you like, an installation like an onion, right? It's just various layers that can be unpeeled, and you have to get to the point where there's something you can redesign and restructure. And again, Install Chills has always made that super easy. So we did a ground up redesign of the installer. We optimized the business processes because there were many different companies involved. This was a telco, and as is normally the case, this telco was not writing their own software. They used various different system providers to do that. We embedded the latest technologies into that product. So at the time it was .NET, there was SQL Server, SQL scripts in there. We did a redesign of how that was rolled out. And subsequently, there was a very successful rollout. I think it's in the millions now of this particular piece of software. So great example of what you might not think of as a problem related to installers, right? You may think if you're in engineering, you're in product development, you might not be involved in your business's support activities, but it's worth keeping an eye on what that's doing, because that can be an early indicator, right, of there being a problem with the deployment or the client base. In this case, nearly half the support tickets were to do with malformed installers. And then another slightly different angle perspective, this was an enterprise client. So again, learning from the past, a large investment bank in London, fairly loose rollout of corporate apps, right? A lot of companies will have a very tightly managed deployment mechanism and software versioning to a certain point. But actually, this was with hundreds of traders, stock traders in Canary Wharf. I took just a few examples of people loosely deploying a badly installed and a badly updated product into their enterprise to cause massive issues. And this actually is something we still see today, but less so. Those of you who are out there who've been doing installations on software for a while will know the term DLL, right? With Pushpa, you will remember this from back in the day when we both cut our teeth in technology, where Crispin's product is overwriting a DLL that Pushpa's product likes, and Pushpa's product reinstalls the DLL, so Crispin's product doesn't work, and so it continues. And that's a massive problem even today, even with all the funky Windows 11 and .NET and cloud builds and AWS, right? These are still products that are installed at a certain endpoint. It's just that endpoint might be in the cloud, right? It still needs managing. And in this case, this malformed deployment brought down hundreds of traders' machines. You can imagine the cost of that, right? I mean, just horrendous cost. But again, all avoidable with having a bit of strategy in there and taking a step back periodically to review that technology. So a couple of examples from the past. There'll be others. There are many others. So this is another example of how a malformed enterprise deployment and perhaps not keeping an eye on the technology has caused a huge repercussion in the business. And again, something that's very avoidable with just a little bit of best practice and some vision into the future. So I think in terms of my input and Pushpa's input for today, I think we'll draw a line there. And I think if there's any questions from the field, we can pick those up.
Great. Thank you so much, Crispin and Pushpa. That was great. So we have had a couple of questions come through. We've not got a huge amount of time left, but please do add your questions to the chat and we'll get to as many as we can live. Okay. So first question I see here is, how can companies strike a balance between keeping with up-to-date technology trends and maintaining a practical installation and update strategy?
Sure. It's a classic question in terms of what is that balance, right, between keeping an eye on the technologies that are available and are they relevant to me, but also keeping my business productive by kicking out releases when I need to, how he's serving the software development life cycle, for example. In the past when I've worked, the installation was given a point at about 97% of progress through the software development lifecycle. So it's almost like an afterthought for the installer. So my perspective and from my perspective, it's make sure the installation process and the technologies within that are built into your whole product release. Have some foresight into how that's going to be managed, who's going to manage it, right? Sounds easy, but is it a marketing problem? Is it a product development problem? Is it a software engineering problem? Right? Because if you don't have clear lineage, then everyone will think everyone else has solved that problem. And I think it's just having one eye on the trends and one eye on the business, and you've got to keep that communication open. But it's not straightforward.
Great, thanks. And another one here. Is Windows 10 still fit for purpose in your view? A lot of our users are saying they have no plans to move off it for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. So I think if you look at any of the industry stats from Reuters or anybody, everyone's saying, Gartner, for example, as well, certainly in the enterprise world, which makes up most of our platforms, right? Windows 10 is about 60-65%. And about a year ago, it was about 75-80%. So it's slowly getting there. Is it fit for purpose? Yeah, it is. It depends what your purpose is, but you are going to have to come along to Windows 11 and beyond because that's an inevitability. I think people don't have plans to move forward because they're a little bit afraid about what they need to do to one of the points in our earlier slide, right? I mean, Pushpa, you probably get this as much because you've been supporting Windows 11 for quite a while as an install shield, right?
Yes. So it's slower. The adoption is slower, but it's happening. If you see
Yeah.
today, I think 27% adoption is already there, and it's only gonna grow as and when people realize that there's no backward path and they have to keep moving forward. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, the question was, is Windows 10 fit for purpose, not is Windows 11 fit for purpose, which is where we tend to go. But yes, it is. But I think what will catch up with you is that support from Microsoft ends in 2025, right? Hardware, as it gets replaced every 3 or 4 years in the business, will start to not bother supporting Windows 10. But, I work with clients in kind of grey networks, right? So either military or industrial situations where like a power station it's not net connected, it's all off grid, and that's for running Windows XP. But again, very, very few and far between now, and to push this point, it's going to be moving forward. So yes, it is fit for purpose, but it is changing and it should change.
Great. So I think we could just try and squeeze in one more question. So I have a final one here. What do you think is the future of .NET and associated heavy dependencies? We see a lot of problems deploying these.
Yeah, interesting. And we spoke about .NET earlier, right? Being the big beast about 10 years ago, and it was hundreds and hundreds of megabytes in some versions, and it was a real pain to deploy. What I see is those core technologies that people will still need in some form are moving to the operating system environment into which they're being focused. So it's becoming less of a dependence on the installation itself, but they're actually telling their end users, you must have these prerequisites in the machine. And they're almost just sidelining the problem. It's this, you're not going to suddenly not need .NET. If your software needs .NET, you need .NET. But, an install shield has got some great technology around the prerequisites, right? Push for the prerequisites editor. So clients can make their own prerequisites and just be a bit smarter about how they're deployed. So I think taking that choice away, or not that choice, but that onus, that pressure, right, on the end user to know what they're doing, and taking it away from them. And that's really our job as installation engineers. That's my perspective.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, what .NET does, and it's gonna Microsoft will continue to support it. But from install shield perspective, we are continuing to add in the recent past. Just in 2024, we have added some custom action to support .NET builds. So we continue to support. We continue to upgrade ourselves to keep up with the new changes in the .NET world.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. So I think that is all we have time for today, unfortunately. But thank you to everyone for your questions. And especially thank you to Pushpa and Kristen for a really informative session. Don't worry if we didn't get to your question today. We can follow up with you after the webinar. Great. Well, thank you again, guys. And please join us for our next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.